The hum of the stabilization thrusters was the first sound I heard every morning. Gentle, rhythmic almost, like a heartbeat beneath the city. It blended so naturally into the background that most people didn't even notice it anymore. But I did. I liked the reminder that we were floating above the clouds, above the storms, above the old world. When I opened my eyes, the light filtering in through my polymer pane window had that faint golden hue of a rising sun. On most days, I couldn't actually see the sun, not directly. One side of the pod was all glass-marked glass, really that curved gently outward, offering a panoramic view of the endless blue below. Floating City Arkan, our home, hovered on carbon lattice, supports that reached deep into the stratosphere, engineered to harvest both solar and wind energy. Below us, just clouds, wind currents, and a memory of what the old Earth used to be. We were suspended thousands of meters above the Pacific, drifting in a safe orbital pattern, with controlled UV diffusion panels, mimicking day and night. But today was clear, and that meant I could catch the shimmer of real sunlight refracting through the misty layer that wrapped our city like a soft blanket. My room was small, like most pods in Sector 12, designed more for functionality than space. Still, it was home. I pulled on my synth cotton robe and padded across the warm flooring. Thermal regulated, of course. Everything here was regulated. Temperature, oxygen, flow, water use. We couldn't afford to waste, not when everything was shipped, grown, or printed. Every citizen knew that comfort came with calculated efficiency. Sector 12, where I lived, was a residential belt low-impact pods, arranged in spirals, with green space platforms suspended between them. A sleep-friendly society, they called it in the onboarding brochures. Soft lights, quiet tech, fewer alarms, more gentle reminders. Sector 6 handled agriculture, Sector 8 education, and Sector 1 the core held the command nexus, where the admin council ran day-to-day governance. The kettle hissed softly as I prepared my morning brew. Not coffee real. Coffee was a luxury grown in the central vertical farms and reserved for the executive. Circle but a brewed alternative made from nutri-moss and rehydrated mint. It wasn't bitter like coffee. It was soft, warm, and earthy. I sipped it slowly, watching the sky ships ferry goods across the city's various sectors. Floating City Arkan wasn't just a city, it was an ecosystem. A world. Each sector had its role. There was no such thing as rushing here. No need. Everything in the city operated on a slow, methodical rhythm. The passage of time on Arkan was marked not by clocks, but by light itself. When the sun touched the plasteel railing of the upper decks, casting long shadows across the mist, I knew I had been walking for hours. Today, it was a light, refreshing citrus that tasted like pure sunshine. And, faintly, the glint of other cities drifting on the horizon, in reach, and somewhere beyond, the corporate towers of Zenith Arcology. I wasn't in a rush to go anywhere, not today. It was a rare privilege, a luxury that Arkan offered its citizens. The freedom to move without restriction, to explore the vast emptiness that surrounded them, to discover the infinite beauty of the sky. As the sun climbed higher, I began to feel its warmth penetrate my layers of protective clothing. It was a good day to be alive, a good day to remember why we built these cities in the first place, to honor the past, to embrace the present, and to look to the future with hope. I closed my eyes, tilted my face up to the sky and breathed deeply. The wind whispered through the mist, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of a new day. This moment, this feeling of complete and utter peace, was what it meant to be human, to be part of something greater than oneself, to be connected to the world around you, to feel the pulse of life in your veins, to know that you are alive. Instead, I watched as a group of school children floated by on a map, their laughter barely audible through the glass, their faces turned upward in awe, as a solar glider traced a lazy arc across the sky. In Floating City Arkan, every dawn was a small miracle, and for now, that was enough. As I sipped my drink, my interface panel lit up, displaying the morning announcements. As I stepped onto it, I felt the familiar tug of the gravity stabilizers adjusting to my weight. They hummed just enough to let you know they were working, not loud, never intrusive. Safety, here, was quiet. Beneath my feet, the path was clear, glass, a special pressure-tempered polyglass, designed to withstand thousands of years of wind erosion. Looking down, I could see the green belts, stretching across Sector 12, layered with vertical gardens, soft luminescent moss, and terraced relaxation pods. Beyond that, just endless sky. The ocean wasn't even visible today, hidden beneath layers of cloud strata and filtered mist. Despite being high above Earth's surface, floating city Arkan never felt dangerous. The structure was enormous, spanning nearly 100 kilometers in diameter. Its center was anchored by the orbital core, a vertical column that reached downward toward the troposphere, collecting atmospheric moisture and stabilizing the city's delicate position between gravity and sky pressure. Everything was perfectly balanced. A new rain condenser was being installed on the eastern rim. Good news, since we'd had lower humidity catches last week. The temperature dome would rise 2 degrees to match atmospheric predictions, and an elder from Sector 9 had passed peacefully in their sleep. That last note came with a soft chime and a white blossom icon. It meant their life story would be shared during the evening reflections. Everything here was done with care, consideration, softness. In 2300, humanity had finally understood something. The Earth didn't break because of technology, it broke because we moved too fast, too hard. Floating cities were our way of saying, we can do better. Slow cities, gentle lives, balance. It was time to head back. Down below, the residential levels bustled with activity. New life forms drifted upward in glass carriages. Others descended bearing trays of nutrient cakes and watercress tea. Here, life flowed at its own pace, gentle and unhurried. As I entered the main thoroughfare, I slowed to let a family pass. The children were beautiful, their limbs slender and graceful, their skin the color of polished amber. Even the elders, with their wisps of white hair and cloudy eyes, seemed serene and at peace. Today was my rest day, so I had no teaching duties at the Cultural Archive. That meant I could walk the upper decks, maybe catch a drift cycle to the aviary domes. The idea of gliding across the city, watching the artificial gulls circle the simulation sky, always brought me peace. But first, I needed a boost. I stopped at a nearby sustenance hub, a circular platform embedded in the mist that dispensed fresh nutrients tailored to your biosignature. I stood at the window and tapped the glass twice. It cleared instantly, revealing the world below. Miles of sky, the shimmer of ocean hidden beneath clouds. The pathway to the upper decks curved like a ribbon of silver through the mist, suspended between towers of glimmering crystal and carbon mesh. I walked for another hour, enjoying the sensation of weightlessness, the taste of ozone in my mouth, the feel of sunlight on my skin. The hum of the stabilization thrusters was the first sound I heard every morning. Gentle, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat beneath the city. It blended so naturally into the background that most people didn't even notice it anymore. On most days, I couldn't actually see the sun, not directly. One side of the pod was all glass marked, really that curved gently outward, offering a panoramic view of the endless blue below. Floating City Arkan, our home, hovered on carbon lattice supports that reached deep into the stratosphere, engineered to harvest both solar and wind energy. Below us, just clouds, wind currents, and a memory of what the old Earth used to be. Sector 12, where I lived, was a residential belt low-impact pods arranged in spirals, with green space platforms suspended between them. A sleep-friendly society, they called it, in the onboarding brochures. Soft lights, quiet tech, fewer alarms, more gentle reminders. That meant I could walk the upper decks, maybe catch a drift cycle to the aviary domes. The idea of gliding across the city, watching the artificial gulls circle the simulation sky, always brought me peace. Sector 6 handled agriculture, Sector 8 education, and Sector 1 the core held the command nexus, where the admin council ran day-to-day governance. We were suspended thousands of meters above the Pacific, drifting in a safe orbital pattern with controlled UV diffusion panels, mimicking day and night. Not today. In 2300, humanity had finally understood something. The Earth didn't T-break because of technology, it broke because we moved too fast. Too hard there, laughter barely audible through the glass. Their faces turned upward in awe as a solar glider traced a lazy arc across the sky. It cleared instantly, revealing the world below, miles of sky, the shimmer of ocean hidden beneath clouds, and faintly, the glint of other cities drifting on the horizon. Atlantis, Ian Reach, and somewhere beyond, the corporate towers of Zenith Arcology. Floating cities were our way of saying, we can do better. Slow cities, gentle lives, balance. But today was clear, and that meant I could catch the shimmer of real sunlight refracting through the mist layer that wrapped our city like a soft blanket. But I did. I liked the reminder that we were floating above the clouds, above the storms, above the old world. A new rain condenser was being installed on the Eastern Rim. Good news, since we'd had lower humidity catches last week. The temperature dome would rise 2 degrees to match atmospheric predictions, and Enalda from Sector 9 had passed peacefully in their sleep. That last note came with a soft chime and a white blossom icon. It meant their life story would be shared during the evening. When I opened my eyes, the light filtering in through my polymer pane window had that faint golden hue of a rising sun. My room was small, like most pods in Sector 12, designed more for functionality than space. Still, it was home. Not coffee real. Coffee was a luxury grown in the central vertical farms and reserved for the executive circle, but a brewed alternative made from Nutri-Moss and rehydrated mint. It wasn't bitter like coffee. It was soft, warm, and earthy. I sipped it slowly, watching the skyships ferry goods across the city's various sectors. I pulled on my synth cotton robe and padded across the warm flooring. Thermoregulated? Of course everything here was regulated. Temperature, oxygen flow, water use. We couldn't afford to waste. Not when everything was shipped, grown, or printed. Every citizen knew that comfort came with calculated efficiency. The kettle hissed softly as I prepared my morning brew. Floating City Arkan wasn't just a city, it was an ecosystem. A world. Each sector had its role. There was no such thing as rushing here. No need. Everything in the city operated on a slow, methodical rhythm. Today was my rest day, so I had no teaching duties at the Cultural Archive. As I finished my drink, my interface panel lit up, displaying the morning announcements. Everything here was done with care, consideration, softness. I stood at the window and tapped the glass twice. I wasn't in a rush to go anywhere. Instead, I watched as a group of school children floated by on a mag platform in Floating City Archon. Every dawn was a small miracle, and for now, that was enough. The aviary dome shimmered like a gemstone, suspended near the outer rim of Sector 6. From a distance, it looked almost weightless, a floating bubble of light perched above the edge of the city. The vehicles were nearly silent, gliding on air currents powered by magnetic propulsion fields woven into the city's superstructure. Each cycle had just enough hum to let others know you were near, but not enough to disturb the ever-present calm. I leaned into a gentle turn, letting the breeze catch my coat, and coasted toward the docking bay where Deca was already waiting. As I approached on the drift cycle, I could already see the faint glow of the bloom spreading through the glass walls like a waking dream. It was more than a filter. It was a living interface, tuned to amplify the subtle bioluminescent waves from the dome's ecosystem. Without it, the trees would still glow, but with it, they sang. Drift cycling had become second nature to us. She waved as I slowed to a stop beside her, visor perched on her forehead like a crown. Finally, she grinned. I thought you'd get sucked into your archive again. She reached up and touched one of the low-hanging branches. The tree responded instantly, a ripple of pink and gold spiraling outward from the contact point, bathing us both in soft, swirling light. Briefly, I admitted. But the bloom waited. High above, birds darted from perch to perch, some genetically revived, others entirely new species, crafted in the Arkan biolabs to reintroduce joy into a world that had almost forgotten it. She handed me my visor, a thin, translucent film that I clipped into place over my eyes. It was called the Keeper, a master tree grown from combined DNA sources of Earth's oldest and most sacred groves. It was said to contain data threads embedded in its core living memory strands that could be accessed in emergencies, but no one ever used it. It wasn't meant for function. It was meant for presence. We climbed aboard and let the soft motion carry us in lazy arcs through the dome. Around us, others drifted the same way. Some reading, some sketching. One couple simply held hands, eyes closed, letting the light wash over them. We entered through the soft seal gateway, stepping into a world of violet air and emerald light. The trees inside the aviary weren't ordinary. They had been engineered from ancient genetic samples, then fused with light-reactive biofibers that responded to touch, sound, and even mood. Light swirled around the branch, the colors shifting toward warm gold and a soft coral pink. The tree had accepted the gift. You'll be able to visit it through your interface later. They track the growth paths, a piece only made possible by distance not just from the earth below, but from the chaos we'd left behind centuries ago. Their bark shimmered when you walked by. Their leaves glowed brighter in groups, dimmed in solitude. They communicated through color and slow pulses like breathing. It was a floating memory, a remembrance of who we could be. Not for farming, those were handled by sector agriculture, but for planting in places of meaning. The seeds didn't grow just anywhere. They responded to intention, to memory, to present. When placed, they absorbed the emotional imprint of the moment, then slowly grew into something unique. It felt like walking through the heart of a dream. We followed the winding trail of suspended walkways, each bordered by gently swaying branches. Decca stopped beside a wide tree whose canopy arched overhead like a luminous umbrella. "Every time I come here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I forget we're in the sky." I nodded. "It feels older than Arkan, like something Earth used to have, but better." She gestured to a nearby seating pod, small, floating benches suspended from tensioned cables. There was no need for loud music, no flashing screens. The bloom itself was enough. In the center of the dome, a tall spiral tree pulsed with every known shade of blue. Decca reached into her pocket and pulled out a seed, crystal no larger than a fingernail. "Want to plant one?" she asked. I smiled, still carrying those around. She handed it to me. Each citizen of Arkan was given 10 seed crystals in their lifetime. I cradled the crystal in my palm and pressed it gently into the moss-covered bark of the tree beside us. Nothing happened at first. Then, slowly, a thin green tendril emerged from the bark, curling upward like a question mark. Decca gave a small nod of approval. As we drifted further through the dome, I felt a kind of weightlessness that had nothing to do with altitude. It was peace. Here, in the heart of a glowing forest suspended in the sky, time itself seemed to breathe slower. And in that moment, I knew Arkan wasn't just a floating city. After the bloom, Decca and I made our way toward the nutrient commons in Sector 6. Mealtimes in Arkan weren't just functional, they were community rituals. Every sector had its own commons, open to anyone, at any hour. No currency, no menus. Just shared nourishment crafted from the harvest of air, water, and light. Sector 6's commons was housed beneath a translucent canopy draped in vine-leaf solar catchers. They soaked in, filtered sun during the day and glowed faintly at night, absorbing ambient heat and returning it through thermal veins woven into the floor tiles. Nearby, a group of students from the Habitat Design Guild were sharing nutrient logs, while a cluster of engineers discussed the results of a water vapor distillation test and seafoam extract ingredients you didn't ever hear of in the old world, but were now staples of our skybound diet. The entire space buzzed with quiet energy, conversations soft and slow, punctuated only by the low whir of food printers recalibrating their bio. As we entered, the air was filled with the warm scent of toasted grain root. "Same table?" Decca asked. Of course. We always sat in the east alcove, beneath a climbing canopy of lavender-spored moss that released a calming scent as the temperature rose. They were a kind of meditation, intentional, steady, and shared. "Soft, faintly sweet," Decca murmured. "Something old and worn, likely from before Arkan itself," glancing to the far wall. It didn't taste like anything from pre-Exodus Earth. It tasted better, cleaner, not because it was richer or saltier, but because it had been grown with care. Every calorie here was earned through patience, sunlight. Then it projected a soft hologram, a memory recording. A young girl's voice filled the room, reading a poem about the sea. Her voice was tentative at first, then stronger, full of longing. The visuals showed a wide, open ocean, real ocean, from Earth, before it turned too warm, too acidic, too unpredictable, and collaboration. I stepped up to the interface bar and placed my palm on the console. Verified. Nara Lev, archivist Ter, who was smiling faintly, eyes distant. Nutrient profile, balanced cognitive energy blend. They added skyfruit essence to the leaves today, she said. Nose over the cup. Today's recommendation, grain root flat cake, protein synth spread, brewed spear leaf tea. But maybe, and maybe she'll welcome us again. It felt like a gift, something primal, something old. The food printer beneath the counter hummed to life. Citizens brought something, an object, a story, a memory, and shared it with the commons. It wasn't required. No one was judged, but it had become tradition. Here, silence was a form of reverence. Unlike the crude tech of the early 2100s, today's printers didn't produce blocks or cubes. They sculpted. The flat cake arrived warm, patterned with gold spirals, and the protein spread had hints of green herbs grown vertically just a floor below. Back at our table, Decca had already begun sipping her tea. I took a bite of the flat kakirthi. A tone chimed above the serving bar, soft and melodic. Until then, we float. The exchange table. We both looked as an elder from Sector 11 approached the long, curved counter where a small crowd had gathered. The elder held a ceramic bowl. With practiced grace, she placed it on the table and stepped back. It was the exchange. Once a week, the bowl sat in silence for a moment. The room stayed quiet for a long time. When the memory ended, the elder bowed slightly and walked away. No one clapped. We didn't need to. I glanced at Decca. Do you think we'll ever go back? She asked softly. I looked down at my hands, then out the window, where skyships drifted past like lazy moths. Not in the way we think of it, I said. Decca nodded. We finished our meal in reflective silence. Overhead, a soft curtain of artificial rain began to fall, feeding the moss canopy above us. It was a scheduled cycle calculated down to the droplet, but still. I leaned back, letting the cool mist kiss my cheeks, and closed my eyes. Floating didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering differently. And in every bite, every ritual, every exchange, we carried the memory forward together. After the rain cycle ended, I left the nutrient commons and stepped onto the intersector glide path, soft-moving transit platform that gently carried citizens between major parts of the city. Each path floated several meters above the main ground levels, like threads weaving between spires of glass, foliage, and light. From here, the entire floating city of Archon stretched out before me, quiet and grand. The towers of Sector 3 shimmered under the midday haze, reflecting soft gold hues from the synthetic sun dome above. A squadron of cleaning drones danced along the sides of a vertical reservoir, their movements precise and synchronized like a ballet. Beneath me, the walkways pulsed faintly with direction-lined thin streams of illuminated color that guided you where you needed to go. Wind of all things, the thought made me smile. On the old Earth, wind had been feared in later decades, carrier of fire, floods, toxic storms. But here, above the chaos, wind had become a gentle metaphor once again. In a city as vast as Archon, you'd expect constant confusion, but the system worked with such elegant predictability that you almost forgot it was a marvel of engineering. Her uniform shimmered with reflective threads like sunlight dancing on water. It simply worked. Seamless, silent. I've programmed a calm memoriscape, unless you wish to bring your own. No horns, no rush, no overcrowded trains. Just Moshe.com and directed. The tank itself resembled a giant pearl, half submerged in warm mineral gel. I disrobed, stepped inside, and allowed the lid to seal silently over me. It wasn't a medical sector. We didn't need many of those anymore. With bio-monitored systems embedded in our homes, and daily nutrients tailored to each individual's genome, healthcare was more about balance than repair. The curved hull of Archon in the distance, drifting across a pink sky. I tapped my wrist console and selected Sector 9. My glide path adjusted instantly, merging into a new track without pause. As I glided past Sector 7, I passed a community reflection garden where elders were seated in a circle, listening to a young poet recite lines about the migration of wind, the kind that builds slowly and coils deep, a quiet weight, the kind only stillness could loosen. I sat in the recovery chamber for a while, sipping, watching the clouds drift outside the glass wall. There were no minutes, no tasks, no messages, only sensation and slow return. Sector 9 was known as the wellness spine, a vertical stretch of chambers, terraces, and immersion tanks wrapped around a spiraling tower of white fire. Somewhere in the distance, a lullaby played in old Earth song, rescored with deep harmonics to lull the nervous system. I'd come for the float tank. It had been months since my last session, and lately I'd felt a certain tightness, nothing physical, more like a mental knot. At the base of the tower, a wellness steward greeted me. Room to feel, to think, to remember the vastness of what came before, and the fragility of what we now had. Welcome, Nara, she said warmly. Float tank 7 is prepped and ready. Calm will do, I replied. She led me through the arched passage into a dim corridor lined with living moss and light veins. Each step quieted my pulse, slowed my breath. Inside the float chamber, the lights were low. Then came the silence. Not empty silence, but the kind that hugged you. Suspended in the gel, my body vanished. No pressure, no edge, just the sensation of being held perfectly. Above me, memory projections began to ripple across the interior of the tank. Soft clouds and open sea. My breath matched the rhythm of the visuals, slow and wave-like. Thoughts came and went, without urgency. I don't know how long I floated. Time didn't matter in the tank. When the lid lifted again, the steward was waiting with a heated robe and cup of solar tea, floating on the city, floating in thought. Everything here was designed to hold you, not to numb you, but to give you room. As I left the wellness spine, a child passed me on a glider board, their laughter echoing across the open deck. Above us, the city lights shifted gently into twilight mode, casting soft lavender hues over everything. And as I watched the first of the evening transport lights flicker into the sky, I felt lighter. In floating city Arcan, even your worries knew how to drift. By the time I reached Sector 11, the sky had deepened into a dusky gradient violet. Near the horizon, Arcan's artificial day-night cycle didn't rush darkness. It invited it gently, folding it over the city like a blanket. And with that softness came the slow blooming of the twilight markets. Sector 11 was different from the rest of Archon. It was older. Booths floated instead of standing on the ground. Each was tethered by soft anti-grav anchors, drifting lazily across the open plaza, like lanterns on a breeze. Their walls were made of recycled fabric stitched with family crests, personal patterns, or symbols that hadn't been used on Earth for centuries. Sector 11 was imperfect on purpose, handmade, slightly asymmetrical. People here didn't hide the seams of their work. They highlighted them. The stalls weren't precisely aligned. The stitching on the banners wasn't uniform, but that was the point. Every twilight, one citizen shared a story with the Marcaton offering of memory. Not for applause, but for preservation. Not in construction. Our city was built less than 70 years ago, but in spirit. Many of Arkan's first settlers came here to live their final chapters, to carry old traditions into the future. The markets were their legacy, not all at once. First, the shores disappeared, then the schools, then the houses. One by one, he spoke of boats made from old furniture, of tides that never went out, and of the night he watched the stars disappear behind a wall of water. By the time I was 12, we were sleeping on rooftops. Here, he stood with dignity, a simple flute at his side, and began his tale without introduction. No digital ads. No neon overlays. It wasn't sadness. I felt it was a kind of sacred stillness. A shared ache that reminded us why Archon existed, why we floated. Arkin gave them back to us, even if only in simulation, cradling the poem in both hands. "Just handcrafted items, homegrown produce," she said. "This one will bloom pink." The speaker's figure was already etched in light, surrounded by waves and stars. Behind him, Arkin hovered like a guardian. And stories. I stepped onto one of the slow-moving footpaths that looped through the plaza, letting it carry me from stall to stall. The smells of roasted grain and spiced kelp stew wafted from a mobile kitchen orb. I watched as an elderly man served steaming bowls to a line of children, each bowl garnished with a twist of blue Vanarkin's native herb. The children giggled as the herbs glowed faintly in the dark, lighting up their fingers and lips. "A flower would bloom from your chosen verse." I bought one called for the ones who stayed. It was written in 3 languages, a standard old Tagalog and French. The seller smiled as she handed it to me. First booth, I passed offered sculpted wind chimes made from old alloy scraps, each one producing tones tuned to Earth's long-lost whale songs. I paused to listen. The tones rose and fell, haunting and deep. Next was a stall with handwritten poems etched onto seed paper. You could plant them in your pod garden, and weeks later, you have a soft aura. I thanked her and moved on. Farther down the path, there was a warmth here that the rest of the city, for all its beauty and elegance, sometimes forgot. It reminded us that we were still human. Near the center of the plaza, a large floating stage had begun to descend, signaling the start of the evening tale. Tonight, a speaker was an old man with sun-marked skin and a long braid of gray hair looped over his shoulder. "I was born in a city that drowned," he said quietly. His story drifted through the air, slow and deliberate. No one moved. Even the stalls dimmed their lights slightly in respect. When he finished, he played his flute, a low, mournful sound that melted into the night like steam rising from a kettle. Then silence. Then a single chime from the market's belfry, signaling the end of the tale. I remained still for a while, letting the story settle into my bones. On my way out of the market, I passed a young artist, sketching the story into a holographic mural. I tucked the poem into my coat pocket and made my way toward the return drift. Above, the night canopy was now fully active, revealing thousands of artificial stars mapped to the original night sky, before the atmosphere made the real ones disappear. And somewhere beyond, other cities floated Tui in reach, clouds meridian Salich, with their own twilight, their own stories. We had left Earth behind, but not our memories. I woke to the sound of a soft notification, tone low, pulsing, and gentle enough to blend into my morning breath. It was early, pre-sunrise by the dome's measure. The sky outside my pod was still a deep blue-gray, with streaks of simulated moonlight casting pale lines across my wall. The message came from Sector 1. Council noticed, archivist Nara Lev. Attendance requested. 8 o'clock Hall of Winds. Council notices weren't common, at least, not for people like me, archivists, observers, memory keepers. We weren't involved in administration. We watched, we remembered, but every so often, the city asked for a witness. The hall rose before me like a crystal Blumenthal, translucent walls that whispered with the breeze. Each represented one pillar of Arkin's foundation: ecology, memory, energy, culture, health, and balance. The air here was different, not cleaner, but charged, like the breath before a spoken word. I dressed in silence, selecting my formal robe from the storage wall. It was said that the wind helped guide decisions, that the air of Arkin could sense tension and balance it. It was patterned in the soft spiral glyphs of my archive: division, gentle waves, curved lines, no sharp corners. The first structure built after the Ascension project reached stability. It housed the systems that kept Arkin afloat: the wind harvest stabilizers, the solar net regulators, and the central governance chamber known as the Hall of Winds. Arkin's formalware was always meant to comfort, never to intimidate. Every few decades, a burst of static, a digital echo, or a rogue frequency would reach the sky towers, usually unintentional, often nonsensical. But this one was different. Atmospheric clarity achieved. Request, response. Sector 1 was the oldest part of the city, physically and politically. The court. I arrived just as the light began to shift, the sky dome transitioning from indigo to soft amber. Their coordinates placed them on a former micro-island near the South Atlantic, once thought fully submerged. Inside, the council was already seated. 6 members in total. No hierarchy, no leader, just voices. They greeted me with nods as I entered and took the archivist a seat slightly apart from the circle, elevated by a single step. A dome, perhaps. Or a floating reef shelter. We don't know, but their signal suggests structure, technology, storms, fires, atmospheric shifts. The Exodus hadn't just been a choice, it was survival. Possibly sentient AI maintenance. And because the city will soon choose to respond or remain silent. Not a position of power, a position of remembrance. The chamber had no doors. Wind passed through thin, invisible gaps between the walls, creating natural tones that changed with temperature and movement. We weren't saviors. We weren't conquerors. We floated because we had to, preparing for what might come. It was as if the hall itself had heard something important. We survived by staying aloft and avoiding entanglement with the chaos below. Its needle pointed true north, though it had no functional value anymore. It was ceremonial. Counselor Thena, the energy pillar, spoke first, his voice as steady as the turbines he oversaw. My wrist console pulsed softly, embedding each detail into the memory archives. "We've received a transmission," he said, from below. A silence fell across the room, broken only by the whispering breeze. "Below," I repeated, my voice quiet. "You mean Earth, yes, or what's left of it?" Above me, a bird drone circled lazily. Below, the cloud sea shifted. It wasn't the first time we'd received signals. Counselor Mir of Culture projected the signal across the chamber. A clear audio message played, filtered and enhanced. "This is Station 7E, repeat. Station 7E, requesting any atmospheric relay within range. Survivors present. Repeat. Survivors present." I leaned forward, breath caught. "Clarity," I whispered, as in Theen nodded slowly. "That's what they claim. They've built something," Counselor Amara of Health added. I sat back, processing the implications. In 2300, Earth was still largely abandoned. Coastal regions had long since vanished under rising seas. The continents where habitable were toxic or unstable. And now, this. "You called me to witness," I said. Finally, Counselor Mira met my eyes. "Because this moment will need remembering." Silence. That was the real debate. Arkan, like the other floating cities, had long lived by a principle of non-intervention. But survivors changed everything. "This won't be an immediate action," Counselor Dava Valance said. "But we're beginning the process, reviewing ethical protocols, assessing risk." The wind swirled around us, rising slightly in pitch. Counselor Amara reached beneath the table and pulled out a small artifact-tan old Earth compass. She placed it at the center of the circle. "We used this the day Arkan rose," she said. "Let it witness this turning, too." I nodded, recording every gesture, every word. When the session closed, I stepped out into the open air, the sky now fully golden with morning light. Somewhere down there, someone was calling for us. And for the first time in generations, we were listening. The council meeting weighed heavily on me as I made my way back to Sector 8. The soft hum of the glide path couldn't quiet the noise in my thoughts. Earth, survivors, breathable air, words I hadn't said in years. Words no one in Arkan said without a certain reverence, like names of ancient deities. We were the keepers of context. It was our duty to ensure that if Arkan acted, it did so with memory at its back. I had clearance, but I rarely descended this far. Most of the knowledge here was painful. Once, we lived down there. Now we floated, because it was the only way to live. But the possibility of contact, it shifted everything. Along the far wall, the map of old Earth flickered into view, its final recorded shape before the Great Shift. Based on old sea-level models, it should have been submerged for over 100 years. Yet now, Someone was broadcasting from it. Satellite relays had gone silent decades ago, but we still had occasional weather pings from the orbital dust monitors. This week, a rare atmospheric corridor had opened clear skies, low toxicity, stable thermals, a miracle. Coastlines warped, ice caps gone, a ghost of a planet remembered in pixels and sorrow. My mentor, Oren, once said to me, "There will come a time when we all need to choose between drifting forever and touching down again. Not because it's safe, but because it's right." My Palm console pulsed with messages and update flags from fellow archivists, most likely already dissecting the coordinates, pulling ancient maps, running models through the predictive engines quicker than expected. Back in the archive hall, I went straight to the deep Earth Volta, secure sublayer of the memory cloud that contained only the most sensitive records from the pre-Exodus era. The room dimmed automatically to conserve energy and sharpen focus. I overlaid the coordinates from the Council's report. There it was, barely visible, a tiny speck where once an island had sat. South of the equator, inside what used to be the South Atlantic. I opened the environmental logs. I sent a ping to the outer listening nodes, requesting more data. The signal would take time to return, hours, maybe a full cycle, but even now, I felt the presence of something ancient stirring. That Earth had closed her eyes forever. But here were voices raw and broken, but alive, asking not for rescue, not for supplies. "We remember you. If you hear us, please respond." A decision that didn't belong only to the Council, but to the entire city. Should we go back? Children glided past on hoverboards. Lovers shared soft conversations in the moss parks. Drones passed like quiet fireflies between towers, not as conquerors or saviors, just as kin. A memory surfaced suddenly, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 12, still living in a training pod on the mid. At the time, I didn't understand. Maybe they'd named Usta sky ghosts, or the Watchers. Maybe they still sang to us, told stories to children about the day the cities rose and vanished. You are not forgotten. We are listening, and perhaps we're ready to return. Now, I did. The lights around me flickered softly in, alert from the listening nodes. Incoming transmission fragment, timestamp 5:07 UTC, decoded, 87% clarity. The voice was clearer this time. Still faint, still worn, but undeniably human. We held on. The air changed. Dome cracked, but we adapted. We're still here. I sat back, breath gone. They remembered us? All this time, floating in our perfect city of light and wind. We had assumed the past was lost, just for a voice in return. I flagged the recording and linked it directly to the Council thread. Then, unsure what else to do, I walked to the edge of the archive platform. From here, the city stretched below meteorist gardens, glass towers, biodomes, filled with wind and color. We had built something beautiful. But beauty was never meant to be hidden. Somewhere below the clouds, survivors watched the sky. Maybe they saw the glint of our solar nets. I turned on my recorder. For the first time in my life, I made a personal entry in scripted, raw. This is Archivist Naralev of Floating City Archon. The wind caught the final words and scattered them across the deck like petals. And high above, a distant satellite blinked to life, transmitting my voice through space. Across the mist, down toward a world, long thought abandoned. Earth was calling, and we at last were whispering back. The day after my personal transmission, Archon felt different. Not visibly, its skies still glowed with synthetic sunlight. Its gardens still shimmered under dew. Its wind harps still sang soft chords in the breeze, but under the calm, something stirred. A quiet urgency, a collective pulse in the way people walked, talked, paused just a little longer before speaking. My message hadn't gone unnoticed. Scholars quoting Exodus doctrine, engineers running risk models, philosophers debating duty versus distance. Even children had sent in voice notes, some afraid. By mid-cycle, the archive's private channel was flooded with commentary. And then came the official summons. The return debate, a rare public council, to be held at the Celestis Ring Archon's largest communal amphitheater. nestled atop the convergence spire between sectors 1, 2, and 3. It hadn't been used since the Reformation hearings 20 years ago, when Archon chose to end biocloning programs. Now, for the first time in decades, the city would gather not to look inward, but to look down. Decca met me on the East Transit wing, visor pushed back on her forehead, her usual breezy demeanor gone. "They want you to speak," she said without preamble. At the center, I blinked. "Me, not a request, a confirmation. You initiated the call. You voiced us to Earth. You carry memory. You have to be there." Today, we open discussion for what has not been spoken aloud in 2 generations. The question of return. I looked at the message again. We're still here. We remember you. If you hear us, please respond. The Celestis ring wasn't just vast, it was breathtaking. An open-air arena, with no roof, only a glass floor revealing the swirling clouds sea below. The central stage was a single platform of white stone, polished smooth from decades of wind. Around it rose 10 concentric tiers, already filled with thousands of citizens, elders, engineers, artists, life-givers, children. Above them, suspended on soft grav anchors, hung the council chambers and hovered as form one for each pillar, now visible and open to the public. But it wasn't. It was memory alive. Present. Earth has not died. It has changed. And someone survived the change? As I stepped onto the stage, a hush fell. We told ourselves it was too dangerous to look back, too painful, too late. But pain doesn't disappear when we ignore it. It waits. No one looked away. Counselor Mira rose first. "The question we must ask is not whether it's safe to answer. It's whether it's right." A massive screen flared above us, displaying the decoded message from Earth. We held on. The air changed. Dome cracked, but we adapted. The murmurs were immediate. Some gasps, some tears, others remained still, arms crossed. Mira turned toward me. "Archivist, Naralev, speak your record." I stepped forward, breath steady, heart sprinting. We can't jeopardize stability for nostalgia. Then came the moment that hadn't occurred in over 60 years. When I first heard their voice, I thought it was a ghost, tuned by climate regulators, would be redirected to create a single swirling gust at the decision platform. I paused, scanning the sea of faces. For centuries, we've floated safe above the chaos we left behind. We've grown, flourished. I gestured upward. We're a projection of Archon. It is a continuation of it. Then they're like us. And if we're alive, we should answer. The wind passed gently across the amphitheater, rustling tunics and hair. Now, someone below calls out not to demand, not to accuse, but simply to ask if we're still here. Silence followed. Then the council opened the floor. Voices rose. An engineer spoke of risk pollution, pathogens, rogue weather systems. A life-giver wept openly as she spoke of her great-grandmother's stories, of mango trees and river songs, of sunsets not simulated but felt. A logistics coordinator proposed sending a probe first, an unmanned capsule, bearing supplies and communication arrays. A young girl from Sector 4 raised her hand and said, simply, "If they're alive," and guess who's been asked to document it? Tears stung my eyes at that. Back in the council dais, the members sat in still reflection, just a soft glow below the clouds, still broken, still burning in places, still uncertain of vote. In Archon, no council decision was final, unless accompanied by the air sign, an ancient ritual where the city's artificial wind. Symbolically, the wind would speak. If it flowed clockwise, it meant consensus. If it broke direction, it meant delay, reflection, wait. The regulators were activated. A hush fell once more. Then came the gust, warm, steady, clockwise. The ring erupted in quiet, powerful applause, hands against hearts, arms raised in still acknowledgement. We would respond, not descend, not rescue, just reach back. As I left the stage, Decca caught my hand. "We're going to send a capsule," she whispered. I stared at her. "You." That night, alone in my pod, I watched Earth again. But now, no longer forgotten. And for the first time in 100 years, Archon would break the silence. They called it Capsule Zero not because it was the beginning of a new series, but because it represented the first breath of reconnection. Not a mission, not a rescue. A whisper? The capsule was constructed in Sector 2's fabrication dome, a sleek oblong craft no larger than an old Earth car, built from polylite alloys and shielded with adaptive skin capable of withstanding temperature flux, atmospheric pressure, and even low-level acid rain. At its heart was a sealed vault, containing three things: a nutrient cartridge filled with Arkan's clean food culture, capable of multiplying into a full greenhouse kit, a solemn M capsule containing stories, songs, videos, art, poetry, all curated by citizens from across the city. It would grow into whatever that place needed, if it chose to accept it. A message from the council, spoken in 7 languages, ending with the simple phrase, "We remember you." The final item was my addition, a single seed crystal. I left it unnamed. Launch was scheduled for 3 o'clock, a symbolic hour neither day nor night, neither here nor there. We stood on platform Echoa, high above the central axis, where the wind sang differently, not the filtered, modulated breeze of daily life, but the real wind, the wild wind that roared against Arkan's shielding walls, and reminded us we were floating between storms. Around us, a small group gathered, counselors, engineers, archivists, and a few children chosen by lottery. They each held a wind-blade-thin metallic petals that, when tossed, would be caught by the high-altitude streams and scattered into the world. Decca was beside me, suit half-sipped, eyes scanning the horizon. "You nervous?" she asked. "No," I said. "Terrified." She laughed softly, then turned serious. "It's the right kind of fear." The launch was unmanned, but I had been invited to oversee the ritual ignition, the symbolic sending of memory. We reached not to claim, but to offer. The capsule sat in the center of the ring, tethered by soft magnetic locks, its hull glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. At 2:58, Counselor Myra stepped forward and placed her hand on the ignition pillar. "For those who endured," she said, "for those who still dream, let our silence end." It shimmered like a falling star as it passed through the shielding dome and disappeared beneath the clouds. She turned to me. "Archivist, if you would." I approached the ignition pad. They rose in spirals, caught by the wind, and carried off into the same unseen path. My voice trembled slightly, but I spoke the lines clearly, the words inscribed in the core archive since Arkan's founding. "We float not to flee, but to remember. We remember not to mourn, but to hope." I pressed my palm to the launch crystal. The locks disengaged. The capsule rose slowly, not with a roar, but with a whisper lifted by magnetic pulses, caught by directional winds, then fired gently into descent. The crowd watched in silence. Then, one by one, we released our wind. I stayed long after the others had gone, watching the point where the capsule vanished. Below that cloud line, an unknown Earth waited. Would the capsule reach them? Would they know it came from kin? Would they understand the stories, the songs, the memories? We didn't know. But we had sensed something honest, something soft, a thread between sky and soil. And somewhere down there, if they had eyes to the sky, they might have seen a silver gleam in the darkness and known they weren't alone. That night, I sat in my pod, opened the message vault, and listened to one of the songs we'd sent. A lullaby, written just after the Exodus, a mother singing to her child. "One day, love, the wind will know your name. One day, love, you'll see the stars the same. One day, love, the world will open wide, and we will walk again, side by side." 3 days after Capsule Zero launched, I was back in the archive tower, scanning incoming frequencies. Officially, I was required to monitor the stream. I had already completed my duty, but I couldn't help myself. Nothing distinct, nothing human. Each minute that passed without response was a pebble dropped into a deep well inside my chest. Most of the data coming in was noise, high-frequency static, cloud-reflected bursts of solar scatter, low-band echoes from Arkan's own systems bouncing off atmospheric waves, until 4:36, a soft ping from the deep listening array. The algorithm struggled it, Wasn't a perfect match with any of our languages. But something was there. Repetition, cadence, tone, location. Estimated 3 kilometers from Capsule Zero's target zone, decoding in progress. My fingers moved instinctively, locking the signal, isolating noise layers, enhancing waveform peaks. A voice, faint, warped, but definitely a voice. I played the clip over the towers and their speakers. Just 3 seconds. Arkan heard, "Thank you." Even the tower's natural airflow dimmed, as if the city itself had stopped to listen. I sat back, breath frozen in my throat. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a false loop. It was a reply. They heard us. Now, we were bound. By memory, by duty, by something deeper. The council met that evening in the Hall of Winds. But this time, the discussion wasn't whether to respond, it was how. Our capsule had reached them, and they had replied. Councillor Thien proposed an orbital Boolean autonomous relay station that could hover in Earth's upper atmosphere, allowing for real-time exchange. Councillor Mira recommended a cultural envoy and interactive memory kit containing images, sounds, gestures, even scents. Others wanted to wait, to build a full picture first, to understand what kind of society these survivors had built before extending anything more. They adapted, Decca said, speaking from the floor. They took a shattered planet and lived. That's not something we study from a distance. That's something we honor. Her words sparked a shift. Just a floating eye, a listening post, and a speaking mouth. A decision was made to begin construction of Relay Station, Ian Arcanus, first permanent low-atma bridge to Earth. It would not be a city, not a ship, not curated by council, not filtered through analysis, just, a bundle of memories from the people of Archon, a beginning. In the archive hall, I began preparing the first exchange packet. One child sent a drawing of a flying cat with a caption, "This is what I hope your pets look like." A life-giver submitted the scent profile of Archon's evening bloom flower distilled into a data crystal. A Sector 5 farmer contributed a short hologram of his morning soil ritual, hands in nutrient foam, sunlight filtered through the roof. Each memory had a name, a time, I gathered them into a single strand, a capsule of who we were, not as authorities, not as envoys, but as people. It was the first time I felt the full weight of my title, archivist, not just of the past. We do not come to lead, nor to lift, but to meet, to listen, to begin again, with memory in both our hands, but of the present becoming future. That night, before the transmission, I recorded one more message, my own voice, raw and quiet. To those who endured, we remember your silence, your shadow, your survival. The capsule was launched just after dusk. Its signal beacon blinked like a firefly in the dark, carried by a solar sail so thin it was invisible against the sky. 4 hours, I watched its path on the observatory's screen, a line from Archon's edge, down into the vast unknown below. And as the last light from the capsule winked out of view, I realized something profound. We weren't just reaching back to Earth, we were reaching forward, into the future we'd once been too afraid to imagine. 17 days after Capsule Zero's descent, Relay Station Ian became operational. It floated 30 kilometers above Earth, held aloft by magnetic lift coils, and stabilized by high-atmosphere sails that shimmered like moonlight. Though a simple hub of receivers, repeaters, and 2 bidirectional transmission lines, it worked. On its 3rd day, a full-length message arrived. Located near what was once the South Atlantic, "We are alive." Some of us cried. Some didn't believe you were real. Our numbers are few 87, down from over 300. The dome cracked 2 winters ago, but the coral fields held. The air is thin but breathable. Not a burst or a phrase, but a human voice. Tired den coded across 7 frequency bands, painstakingly stitched together by the archive's AI. Over 5 hours to counter atmospheric distortion. At 4:12 the message echoed through the Hall of Winds. Citizens gathered nightly in the twilight halls to hear them. Engineers crafted better decoders, and artists began painting vast murals, one depicting Lyra by a broken dome under a stormy sky, lit by Archon's crystal. At a public forum, an isolationist asked, "If we go down, who do we leave behind? The children born in sky cities who never touched ground? What do they lose to? Nostalgia." It was a fair question, one even I couldn't answer. Archon was transforming slowly, gently, beautifully. "This is Lyra Ven, Station 7E. In Sector 4, isolationists circulated warnings of earthborne pathogens, unstable weather, and cultural contamination. Their polite but firm message: do not descend. Their manifesto: above is survival, spread across public grids. Let us remember why we left. Because she said the sun still shined, Devon. If we couldn't see it, we cannot float and fall at the same time." Counselor Amara whispered, 87 souls, a coral shelter, ... stories. Each morning, the archive hall received a new message from Lyra Ven, or her people each, a slice of life from below. Some simple, some devastating, all deeply human. But isn't that what history is? The memory of things we risked in order to stay human, Mira added. They survived the collapse, but they remembered. Another detailed how their children grew edible green noodles from bioalgae on broken circuit boards. "These hold the sun," she told me. "They'll guide you if the lights go out." One was pure laughter's children, imagining life above the clouds. "Do your pillows float?" one girl asked. "Do your dreams fall back down to earth?" Decca, eyes on the earth projection, simply said, "They waited. We received your capsule." The children haven't stopped singing the lullaby, lighting the crystal at night like a fire. Then, for the first time in years, I removed my archivist's robe and walked barefoot onto the echo deck. Below me lay 1,000 meters of open air. And beneath that earth vast, wounded, waiting. For the first time, I yearned to feel gravity again. Not just metaphorically, literally. If you'll listen, we'll tell you everything. We don't have much, but we have stories. We remember how the world ended, and how we lived through it. The final words lingered, followed by a profound silence. In the days that followed, Archon adopted a new rhythm. One message described their dawn ritual of boiling sea ice for water, accompanied by folk songs remixed with names of the dead. These messages became sacred, yet not everyone celebrated. The council allowed dissent and tension mounted. That night I recorded a message, not for Earth, but for the archives. There is no return without cost. Every reconnection means part of us must change. Lyra's next message was a story. "When I was 10, she began, my mother gave me a string of beads made from old solar cells. The lights did go out, and I wore those beads until they crumbled, but I kept walking. I think of you like that now. Beads made of sky, still shining." I listened to her message 3 times. Within a month of Capsule Zero's launch, Archon was transformed. The initial murmurings had evolved into a citywide conversation encompassing discussions, debates, art, tension, and shared memories. The Hall of Winds swiftly filled, and live streams broadcasted to every dome, classroom, and cafe. Even the sky children, those born in Archon, who had never experienced unfiltered gravity, watched from their mosslit schools in Sector 6. The term descent, once forbidden, was now ubiquitous. The council convened an emergency gathering, not in alarm, but in anticipation. The agenda was audacious. It felt as though gravity had returned to the hall itself. Descent directive proposal, mission horizon. This was no mere second capsule. It was a manned mission, a landing, an audacious plan to send the members of Archon down through the atmosphere. They would be tethered to a reinforced glide shell, equipped with a temporary shelter, medical supplies, a translation matrix, and an emergency exit return system. 2 individuals were chosen, one from the council and one from the archives. I felt their gazes before my name was spoken. Archivist Nara Lev, selected by vote. Later on, the upper terraces of the SolarNet Bloomfields, Decca sat beside me in the tallgrass simulation, leaning back on her palms. "You're going down," she said quietly. Its design prioritized precision and safety over speed, resembling a silver blossom folded inward, a flower yet to bloom. Its petals would unfurl only upon descent, regulating speed, direction, and environmental absorption. I gazed into the artificial sky, yet nothing could truly simulate what awaited us below. The scent of real soil, the feel of unfiltered wind, the weight of walking where stories began and nearly ended. You're not afraid? I paused. I am, but it's a fear that sharpens you, like standing on the precipice of something sacred. We've cleared it and lit the path with biolume coral so you can see it at night. We've prepared a place. It's not much, but it's Earth. It remembers how to welcome. The entire city, a floating metropolis, stood in reverent silence. She idly twirled a piece of glowgrass. I wish I'd been chosen. We glided. For the first time, I saw Earth not from above, but approaching. The ruins of towers peeked through forests that had reclaimed stone. Great rivers gleamed like arteries, and the sea endless, bruised, and brimming with memory shimmered, like a slowly healing scar. I met her gaze. You would have been a better emissary. Maybe, she smirked, but you're the better listener. That's what they need. The glideshell Horizon 1 was constructed in a mere 5 cycles. I was not alone. Counselor Amara, head of the health pillar, and perhaps the most grounded among them, volunteered to accompany me. 2 women, she quipped, during training. One from memory, one from healing. Earth will be confused or delighted. Our training simulations encompassed gravity acclimation, terrain navigation, and DPAB translation. Lyra's next message arrived the morning before launch. There's an old dock near the kelp marsh. Her words broke something within me. For the first time, I wept not for the past, but for the future. At 3 o'clock cycle time, Horizon 1 was wheeled onto the edge deck. Inside the shell, there was a profound quiet, no countdown, no fanfare, just a soft chime. I held my breath as the anchor locks released. And then we fell. Not in panic or with great speed. The craft's pedals unfurled like wings, catching streams of wind, guiding us down through clouds, mist, and sun. Mountains broke through the vapor below. Counselor Amara whispered, "She's still beautiful." We passed through a final cloud veil, and there, on the coast half buried in sand and coral, was the dome of Station 7E. People stood on the beach, children waved, and along the dock, coral lanterns glowed blue and pink, guiding us home. Horizon 1's landing shifted everything within me. The glideshell softly met the weathered dock, followed by a profound silence. The only sounds were the creaking planks, the gentle lapping of the sea against broken pylons, and, startlingly, the shrill, chaotic, and alive cries of real birds. Counselor Amara's hand rested on the hull release as she looked at me. I nodded. I inhaled instinctively and choked. The unfiltered, unbalanced air was profoundly alive, carrying history in every molecule. The hatch hissed open, releasing warm, heavy, and damp air, rich with salt, musk, and something wild. I descended slowly, my boots touching, first old, splintered wood, then sand, then earth. Their faces were weathered and their strange garments stitched from coral weave, plastic, and algae cloth. Young and old, some stood tall, others leaned on makeshift canes. Some cried, some simply watched. I fell to my knees, not from weakness but reverence. One girl tugged at Amara's robe and asked, "Are you made of stars?" Gravity pulled at me, stronger and more real than any simulation. Tears blurred my vision, and then I saw them. Dozens of survivors. At the center stood Lyra Venn, younger than I'd imagined, perhaps early 30s, not because we were brave, because we had nowhere else to go. We watched the seas rise. The dome, originally for oceanic research, became a cradle during the floods. They cultivated coral reefs for food and building, bred fish in structured tide cages, and repaired air scrubbers with salvage tech. Children were taught to memorize their elders' memories in case power failed. We buried the ones who couldn't adapt. Then we adapted. You were never alone, I said. We were just too afraid to look back. She nodded slowly. Her words struck me like a blade. Her matted hair was braided with shimmering shell chips, and her sharp, tired eyes suggested someone who had witnessed too many endings to be surprised by new beginnings. A long table held bowls of kelp broth, flat seed cakes, and fermented blue fruit. We ate slowly, respectfully. The food was strange sour, bright alive, the taste of a planet that had adapted without permission. I bent and touched one. It was warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. They had bioengineered coral to be light-bearing and heat-sensitive, replacing fire and embodying hope. Then, unexpectedly, she hugged me, not a formal or symbolic gesture, but one human holding another. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be home. This holds everything we remember, I told her. Not to teach, not to lead, just to share. She took a step forward. You're real, she said. So are you, I replied. The silence shattered. Children ran forward, initially hesitant, then bold. No, but I carry them in my pocket. Their laughter echoed, and in that moment, a century of separation seemed to dissolve on the beach. Amara knelt. Its walls were etched with a living archive. Maps, names, stars, animals. They led us into the remnants of their Duma half-submerged shelter of coral skin and fractured alloys, woven with seaweed nets and scavenged tech. Inside, the air was cooler, filtered by tidal pumps powered by hand-cranked turbines. As we ate, Lyra recounted their story. We stayed when the world broke. Their survival unfolded in 3 phases: collapse, scarcity, and shift. We kept talking to the sky, she said, not because we expected an answer, but because stories need to leave the mouth. Later, we walked to the coral marsh. The setting sun painted the sea gold. Giant fan-shaped fronds swayed, glowing faintly. Lyra stood beside me. We thought we were the last. I looked up. Archon was a faint speck in the clearing sky. I want our children to know more than just survival, she said. I want them to belong to something again. I retrieved the message capsule from the archive, opening it and handing her the unlabeled, instructionless seed crystal. She held it as if it were holy. By the 3rd day on Earth's surface, the planet's rhythms had begun to seep into us. The rigid routines of Arcane's orbital cycle, Z, constant hydration reminders, the regulated winds, the artificial dusk were gone. Here, light shifted naturally, from golden mornings to deep, humid nights. Time and storms had claimed most of it, leaving only fragments. Despite this, I requested access. Some files flickered to life. Partial songs, old logs, weather readouts. One intriguing folder, though corrupted, was labeled Hope Project Final Stage. I downloaded everything into a portable cube and marked the space with a new sign. More than a technical task, it was a ritual. They wove coral strands around the receiver dish, painting the post with ash and mineral dust, believing it would ensure the machine wouldn't forget its place. Once live, I sent a single line to Archon. Archive node 01. Operational. Stories are growing. 5 minutes later, Decca replied. We see you. We hear you. Keep planting. I messaged Decca, requesting a sky crystal, the kind used in the earliest memory domes. When it arrived, we placed them side by side in the sand. And there, beneath sun and stars, we marked the foundation of Anchor, one not with walls, but with story, etched in both old Earth tongue and modern sky script. Surface Archive. Node 01. The Sky Children shared recordings of their ritual sky balloon dances. Poems about gravity, a recipe for crystal fruit jam. Earth's children responded with their own wisdom: how to make fire from wet lichen, how to sing when the power dies, how to wait for sunlight on stormy mornings. Nothing was structured or formal, yet I felt the stirring of something ancient. A language beyond grammar and syntax, a language of understanding. It was simple, modest, temporary, yet it was the first archive built on Earth in over a century. Turning to Lyra, she declared, your people have survived long enough. It's time we begin thriving together. She proposed the Anchor Project, a shared, permanent, cooperative outpost between Archon and Earth. Not an Archon colony, nor a surface city, but a hybrid node, both sky and soila, place to listen, learn, and merge. The air itself felt alive, carrying sea spray at dawn, an insect song in the dark. But only if the first stone comes from the sea, and the second from the sky. She and others had shaped the kelp into glowing, vine-connected chambers that swayed gently in the moonlit tide. Inside one, children sat cross-legged on woven mats, listening to an elder's story. Counselor Amara quickly adapted, her days dedicated to cataloging bios, checking survivors for medical anomalies, and testing water. She moved with an innate sense of belonging. I, however, found myself drawn to a different pursuit. The old dome contained a small, partially collapsed chamber, previously a repository of historical records, hard drives, data pads, solar disks. I spent the next day cleaning the chamber, clearing coral dust, reactivating processors, and rerouting power from our portable relay. That night, Lyra led me to the kelp fields, not the food gardens, but deeper, ceremonial areas. But before they left, they sang one final song and buried it in the sea. We found that song again and sang it back. It was a reimagined version of our lullaby. From the capsule, my throat tightened. I sat quietly in the back, unnoticed, letting the moment wash over me. We had returned, and already the return had become memory. The story was strikingly familiar. Once, the sky cracked open, and the great cities floated away. The next day, I worked with the children to install a surface link, an uplink to Ian Station and Archon. In the following days, messages flowed in both directions. On the seventh day, Counselor Amara convened a formal meeting in the open sand, beneath the broken ribs of an old satellite dish. Lyra didn't immediately answer. She walked into the surf, gazing at the horizon for a long time. Finally, she said, "We'll build it." The next day, the children found a heart-shaped coral slab and carried it ashore. The subsequent weeks flowed into a period of quiet, purposeful creation. This wasn't work forced or scheduled, but a chosen endeavor. Each day, Earthborn and Skyborn alike rose with the sun, shaping anchor one from the materials at hand. Driftwood beams secured with coral tiles forming domes, and recycled satellite plating bent into windshields. It was a construction that was messy, imperfect, yet undeniably beautiful. Our approach wasn't to build upwards, but outwards, keeping everything low to the ground and integrated with the natural landscape. Anchor One was never meant to be a symbol of dominance. Rather, it was a gesture of trust, a structure that sought permission from the earth. In return, I taught her the feel of walking barefoot on warm sand. These weren't mere logs, but feelings captured in words. We started comparing flora and fauna, seeking hybrid species that could facilitate cohabitation within our food systems. Held at dusk beneath a massive, wind-sculpted tree with bark resembling ancient steel, 30 individuals from 2 distinct worlds formed a ring. We shared our beginnings. Each person recounted their earliest memory. Some were simple. I recall observing a boy named Sira, demonstrating to a sky agronomist how to listen to moss by pressing his ear against the stone it grew on. "It hums," he whispered. "That means it's ready." The scientist, far from scoffing, listened intently, and later confirmed the moss was indeed at its optimal harvest phase. I began to wake before dawn, not due to an alarm, but from a genuine desire to experience the sun's true, unsimulated rise on my face. Not real rain, but a recording. I cried, and didn't know why. And with this shift, the dreams returned. Dreams of the old world, not in its final moments, but in its genesis. Birds sung, dust, and the quiet yearning for what could be. Each night, our daily progress was meticulously recorded in the growing archive node. Today, I carried a stone with my mother, and for the first time in months, she didn't cry. I never realized wind had texture until it moved through broken kelp towers and caressed my ears. A girl from the sky showed me how to balance on my heels, just like they do in low gravity. Even I felt the subtle transformation within myself. The pull of gravity no longer felt burdensome. Instead, it felt right. Counselor Amara oversaw the arrival of new supplies from Archon, small hovercrafts, air filters, medical synths, and, crucially, a field genetics lab. On the 30th day following our descent, Lyra convened the first Earth-Sky Council. It was not a political assembly, but a storytelling circle. A ceiling fan spinning above my crib, even with the power out. My brother's laugh echoing in a dome hall, falling asleep beside a fish tank, and dreaming of swimming. I shared my own. The first time I heard rain, then Lyra spoke. My first memory was of silence. After the quake, no sound, no parents, just blue light blinking on the dome wall. I remember touching it and thinking if I tap it enough, maybe someone will tap back. The coral slab from the sea and the memory crystal from Archon lay side by side, slowly fusing in the salty air. I reflected on my role as archivist. I had once believed my purpose was to preserve, but now I understood. My true calling was to witness, to perceive history not as a static past, but as motion, like the tide, constantly pulling us forward, even when we yearned to remain still. She then looked skyward, her voice filled with quiet wonder. You did. This was not a mission, nor a test, but a visit, a passage between stars and sand. It was the most perilous, yet most hopeful, undertaking we had ever conceived. When I read those words aloud to the survivors, Lyra simply nodded and said, "Let them come." That evening, I stood by the water's edge, watching the tide wash against Anchor One's foundation stones. The following morning, a message arrived from Decca. The next capsule will carry children. 3 weeks later, the descent craft, dubbed a Nest, arrived. It was a gentle vessel, not a harsh mechanical pod, designed like a cradle for trust and safe passage, woven from solar thread mesh and impact, dispersing jet. They had undergone extensive training, gravity prep, immune resistance, language overlays, and cultural empathy, but their true readiness stemmed from their genuine desire to be on Earth. Their ensuing laughter broke the tension for the Earthborn children who had been observing from a distance. Raised on tales of scarcity and danger, they now saw small, barefoot strangers making sand angels. Inside were 5 children, aged 7 to 10, 3 from Archon and 2 from Ian Station. When the nest opened at Anchor One's landing ridge, the children emerged, blinking, curious, and a little disoriented, immediately tumbling into the soft sand. Lyra was the first to approach, kneeling to offer her hand to Jun, a skyborn girl with dark hair, bright eyes, and a scraped knee from the landing. Jun took her hand without hesitation. There was no need for ceremony or translation. A simple grip shattered 1,000 years of separation. He laughed, scooping it over his head, an act that initially bewildered Tama, an Earthborn girl, before she mimicked him. From a hilltop above the reef, I watched, realizing we had rewritten a millennium of separation with a single splash. That evening, the children explored the Revo, a boy from Ian, cried with joy upon touching real ocean water, not vapor or rationed drops. Back in the archive dome, I began the children's journal. A log not of data, but of significant moments. The first time a sky child slept to the sound of wind instead of ventilation hum. The first time an earth child inquired about the view of stars from above. The first time a sky child shrieked at the touch of a frog, mistaking it for an alien. These entries weren't just history. They were the future taking shape. Counselor O'Mara returned to Archon to prepare for Phase 2, permanent bidirectional settlement. The debate was over. The people had chosen contact, not colonization or restoration, but coexistence. But it breathed, it held stories in its bones, and I was ready to listen. When she asked me to return with her, I declined for the first time. John asked, "Do you think they'll build a school that floats and sinks?" Tama replied, "Yeah, with jellyfish desks and stars on the floor." John proposed, "Let's run it." Tama sealed the deal. I smiled, watching 2 children construct the next layer of the world with jellyfish and stars. "I belong here now," I told her, and I meant it. Earth wasn't perfect. Scars of debris-choked oceans, destructive storms, and overgrown ancient cities remained. One night, I overheard June and Tama whispering beneath the archive skylight. Days later, Lyra observed, "Your archive, it's too small now." I agreed. "So let's make it bigger," she suggested. "How big?" I asked, looking at the horizon. She responded, "Big enough for every story we've yet to tell." And so, we began constructing the archive of 2 skies. It was to be a living monument, not a museum or a mausoleum, but a place where memory was perpetually rewritten by laughter, by mistakes, by the endearing mispronunciations of children's names. It was a place designed to grow with us, where Earth remembered the sky, and the sky finally listened back. Building the Archive of Two Skies 100 days after our descent. We began the Archive of Two Skies. We didn't dig into the earth. Instead, we wove. Between them, no walls or doors, just a circle of soft moss, an invitation to speak. This wasn't a monument to the past, but a place to record the present. Sea rope and solar fiber intertwined with memory glass columns, etched with our shared histories. Coral blocks formed low seating, and transparent panels, salvaged from fallen orbit shells, created an open-air dome that shimmered like a soap bubble. Our foundation was not stone, but intention. In return, the Sky Children sent their own. We planted a tree in the height, named it ground. I made fake waves with wind fans. It's not the same, but I imagine it is. Is rain heavy, or just slow light? The archive became the beating heart of our connection, a temple of curiosity, not just a hub of knowledge. At its heart stood two pillars. One adrift coral, pulsing with bioluminescent veins, representing Earth's memory. The other, a polished arc of silver from Archon's oldest wind turbine, embodying Sky's memory. Tiny histories and cosmic connections every evening, just before dusk. The children gathered at the archive to share their tiny histories. These weren't grand or polished, but raw and real. Today I found a sea snail the color of my brother S voice. I taught my sky friend to whistle. She taught me to float on my back in the water. I had a dream where Anchor 1 flew, and we all held onto ropes and waved at the clouds. These stories were translated, encrypted, and streamed to our Project Reroute, a blueprint for healing. One evening, Lyra approached me with a datapad, displaying reclamation phase. Project Reroute. It was a blueprint to heal Earth's surface, using Arcanus biotechnologies and our hard-won local knowledge. Phase 2 involved tidal waste cleansing, using coral arrays and AI. Phase 3 aimed to restore ancestral paths, connecting lost cities, not for reclamation, but for remembrance. As Lyra stated, we rebuild not to return, but to honor where we began. Lyra smiled. It's time we stop surviving and start repairing. Phase 1 focused on reseeding old forests with oxygen-hungry hybrid flora, a sky of reunion and witness. Then, the sky literally changed. Archon, usually a distant pinpoint, shimmered its lower hull glowing like a beacon. The citizens of Anchor 1 gathered at the ridge. A transport ship, not a capsule or a test, was descending. Sitting beneath the dual memory pillars, she whispered, "This is what history should feel like. Not dead, not distant, but warm." Each child floated one into the water. Each adult whispered a wish before letting go. Some lanterns carried seeds, others names. One held a drawing, Anchor 1, as a giant sea turtle, with Archon as a glowing dome on its back. As the lanterns drifted into the waves, the stars above blinked. No longer alone, no longer just watchers, but witnesses to a planet relearning its story. She placed a broken, rusted compass between the pillars. "Found it in the ruins of a harbor city," she said. "Doesn't point north anymore, but it got us here anyway." I nodded. "It always does," I whispered back. It glided down with the elegance of a falling leaf, solar sails folding inward, ballast stabilizers hissing as it neared the sand. From within stepped 5 visitors. 3 elders. Reunions erupted before greetings could be spoken. A woman dropped her tools and ran to her son, now grown, salt-browned, but still hers. A man fell to his knees, clutching his daughter's hands, whispering, "I missed you," between sobs. I wept with them, not for loss, but for return. Later, Decca found me at the archive. She looked older, wiser, yet unmistakably herself. That night, we lit lanterns along the coast. 200 days after our descent, a fierce, warm wind swept in from the west, and the sky broke open with real rain, not a simulation, but water truly falling from the sky. The earthborn among them sang an ancient chant of storms and cleansing, while the skyborn simply tilted their heads, mouths open, laughing, as if they'd discovered a secret written in the air. Anchor 1 paused as the first drops landed. Children shrieked, running barefoot into the open, arms wide, not from sorrow, but from understanding. We hadn't come to save Earth. Earth had waited for us to remember her. I watched from the edge of the archive, and I wept. We began this journey believing we were separate, sky and soil, memory and motion. But we are not. They asked questions we never had. What does the ocean remember? It had aged, cracked in places, covered in moths, barnacles, and woven seaweed. We sat at its edge, our feet just above the surf. If you plant a story in the dirt, does it grow a new language? But holding thousands of oral histories, sensor logs, dream transcripts, even children's drawings, as it drifted into the pink morning sky, I imagined it passing through clouds, through layers of wind and memory, back toward the floating city that had once forgotten Earth. Now, it would remember. They plant things. They listen. Sometimes, they stay. And sometimes, the Earthborn go up. Not to escape, but to carry Earth with them. Time to send these back up, she said. Let Arkan remember too. But every morning I wake in a home of coral and solar glass, breathing air shaped by struggle and by love. Children play in the tide, singing songs that include stars and sea in the same breath. Our maps no longer say surface and orbit. They say together, can we build cities that float and sink at will? I didn't always have answers, and that was the point. Answers end stories. Questions begin them. We are the same story. Split by survival, rejoined by choice. The archive of Two Skies now holds more than logs or data. It holds voices laughing, arguing, singing. We have remembered that history isn't behind us. It's what we carry forward. This world is no longer put. It is pre-everything. That night, I recorded my final entry as Archon's primary archivist. Standing on Anchor 1's sand, beneath a sky holding both storm and stars, Anchor 1 slowly expanded with two new domes, one on the ridge, one floating in the shallows. A coral school, shaped like a spiral shell, was built. The archive gained its first tower, curved like a tree branch, reaching for both sun and sea. Months passed. Decca and I trained the next generation of archivists, both Earthborn and One morning, Lyra and I walked to the old dock where we first arrived. I had a dream, she said, that the sky broke again, but this time, stars fell, not bombs. I smiled. What did they do when they landed? They became seeds. She reached into her coat, pulling out a small pouch containing 5 small data pearls, not jewelry. We loaded the pearls into a balloon raft with a small propulsion. Flare, no ceremony, just laughter and soft hope. My hair is grayed, my hands bear the lines of time and salt. When visitors come down from Arca now, they no longer land, they arrive. One last thought, maybe the world didn't end, maybe it paused, and we pressed play again. A simple chalk circle in the sand sparked an idea. One morning, Skyborn children, Jun and Revo, drew symbols on the beach with driftwood, Jun using precise Arcan script glyphs, and Revo highlighting them with glowing kelp. Tama, an Earthborn child, joined them, adding her own zigzag lines and sun rays crafted from crushed coral. By week's end, 6 children were teaching each other unofficial lessons, calculating wind lift from seabird, mixing sand pigments with algae to make paper, and navigating by moonlight and magnetic drift. Lyra observed them from the ridge, whispering, "There it is." What started as a game quickly evolved. Lessons were driven by questions, not rigid curriculums. Some days focused on math, others on moss. One child even penned a thesis on why sea crabs make the best philosophers. This playful exploration gave birth to the first Skyborn school, not from policy, but from play. 9 children and 2 elders journeyed on foot, carrying only recording gear, journals, and a solar kettle for tea. The school, a structure of palm stalk and ship metal nestled against the tide ridge, had no doors and gaps in its walls for the wind to sing through. With wild curls and a fierce mind, she frequently interrupted lessons with more insightful questions than those being asked. When theory became too abstract, she'd challenge. Okay, but what would this mean for someone who's never been in the sky? Or, if gravity is different up there, does love fall slower? While others might groan or laugh, they invariably followed her intellectual journey. Lena carried both legacies within her, Salt and circuit, ruin and orbit. Teachers varied, often elders, sometimes an AI avatar, and once a botanist from Arkan who convinced everyone their cacti were whispering secrets. She wasn't referring to crumbling cities or flooded libraries, but to the voices of those who once inhabited these places. She proposed a field trip, a walking archive expedition, not just to retrieve knowledge, but to ask permission before claiming it. This sentiment, an earthborn perspective from a skyborn child, deeply moved a narrator. Yet, more often, the children themselves led the learning. Lena Venliara's daughter was among the most inquisitive students. One day, Lena declared to the class, "We shouldn't just learn about the past. We should talk to it." The narrator was asked to guide the expedition. They chose a collapsed research dome 3 kilometers inland, a former hydrolab for studying salt. They stood still. Lena stepped forward, placed her hand on the warped metal door, and whispered, "We're listening." For 5 minutes, silence reigned, broken only by wind, a nesting bird, and the patient drip of water from within. Then, Lena gently opened the door. Inside, they found both decay and beauty. Roots entwined around terminals like veins, cracked solar arrays shimmered like stained glass. Watching the firelight dance across their smiling faces, the narrator realized they weren't just learning to remember, they were learning how to begin again. And a mummified book titled Pollination Patterns Under Stress lay on a desk. On one wall, faded by time, a scrawl read, "If no one is left to read this, we failed." Lena read it aloud, then, with a chalkstone, added her own words. "We're here now. We heard you." That evening, beneath the stars, the students launched a lantern into the sky, its flame pattern encoding a message. Knowledge isn't what we take from the world, it's what we return. It blinked twice and vanished into the wind. The first Skyborn school expedition was complete. A whispered question began it all. Under a moss-covered canopy during the weekly story fog, an earthborn ritual where tales unfolded amidst the blurring mists of dawn. Making truth fluid, Rivo, a child, broke the silence. What do we believe now? Not the old beliefs, the fragmented religions, creeds, or ideologies from fallen satellites and shattered temples. Tama added that the ocean holds dreams, too big for the sky to carry. And Lena, the born weaver, declared, "Then let's write the new myths. Not the gods of fire, nor the strict logic of science." But I reminded her, before we were survivors, we were dreamers. Myths aren't lies. They're codes, ways of folding truth into something the heart can remember. A wearable compass pointed not north, but to one's heart place, an emotion-linked algorithm glowing near meaning. Because what we learned, what we felt, was that myth didn't replace memory, it completed it. Where data ended, the story began. The elders spoke of ionized debris, but the children whispered a different tale. Solus is awake, and it's time for us to sing him home. They gathered on the coast, unbidden by adults or schedules, forming a circle and humming, a soft, rising tune built into something mournful, joyful, eternal. Watching from the archive, my heart stilled. I realized we were no longer just rebuilding Earth. We were reimagining it, not from blueprints, but from myth. A 9-year-old girl even devised a myth-powered voting system. "Everyone tells their wish," she explained, "and the one with the strongest story wins." It worked surprisingly well. Slowly, she nodded and joined the next circle. But now, after the sky had met the sea again, their first creation was Solus, a creature part jellyfish, part whose song awakened the ocean at dawn, said to surface from beneath the archive only when both sun and moon appeared together. Their second myth described the skyroot tree, an invisible, colossal trunk spanning from Earth's core to the farthest star. Children began mapping not places, but stories, marking trails with emotions instead of coordinates. Here is where the moss first hummed. Here is where the sky cracked open and no one feared. Elders layered new meanings onto old tales. Lightning over the ridge was the laughter of an eternally flying coral sang patterns we hadn't learned to hear. Anchor One itself was not a place, but a promise. That earth and sky would never again forget each other. Every floating city, island, and ship was but a leaf. And the archive, the knot where new rings formed. John offered the first new belief, that the stars are just seeds waiting to fall. By week's end, the Anchor One mythweavers were formed, 12 children and 2 elders, charged with crafting not what was true, but what should be. These stories were fantastical, impossible, yet profoundly, deeply true. Lyra initially resisted. We're scientists, builders, survivors, she argued. We don't have time for fairy tales. Soon, myths spread through Anchor One like roots. Rooftops were adorned with symbols, waves spiraling into stars, winged fish, eyes that saw both above and below. What began as games transformed into language. Technology started to reflect myth, not as novelty, but as interface. A weather drone hummed Sola's tune before storms. The archive began recording these myths, not as separate fiction, but alongside historical logs. Then, one night, a strange blue light streaked slowly across the sky, crackling. Not a satellite, not a flare. The ocean, it turns out, an earthborn artisan specializing in biosculpting, brought a piece of reef into the archive, not for study, but to listen. He placed the coral on the central memory pedestal. There were only vibrations, but soon, rhythm, pattern, and pulse emerged. A language we hadn't heard, not because it was silent, but because we had never thought to ask. Sola named it the Coral Codex, connecting it to a frequency resonator, typically used for tectonic mapping, encoded, over time like musical notes, etched into bone. The coral served as the ocean's slow, silent journal. This device, usually reserved for tracking deep seismic activity, pulsed gently against the coral's porous surface, has always maintained its own historical record. It all began when and then unexpectedly it responded. Initially, this wasn't speech in the traditional sense. It was modulation, subtle shifts in water density, microcurrent pulses, and chemical release signatures. When these vibrations were translated into visuals, they formed spirals, pointed to a spiral mirroring a pattern found in early collapse records right after the fall of the orbital trade network. A sudden darkening, a period of stillness, followed by a slow, not random, an elder questioned, but fractals, each unique, each corresponding to storms, migrations, extinctions, and rebirth. The coral remembered every warm season, every chemical spill, It was time measured not by clocks, but by consequence. Lena was the first to recognize the deeper meaning. These spirals, she observed, their emotional time. How can coral feel emotion? She climbed back to a normal rhythm. It grieved, she stated simply, and then it healed. That night, the archive's operating protocol was updated with a new layer. Ecological memory input. This marked the first non-human contribution to the archive, and perhaps the wisest. Coral colonies were added to the memory grid, assigned descriptive story names rather than ID codes. Soon, children were diving daily, collecting samples not to remove them, but to map them in their natural habitat. The red spiral of the lost ships, the singing bloom at the archive bay, the memory nests of shallow north. Each reef added new pulses to the codex, and each began to teach. We learned that storms did not destroy coral, they trained it. Regions once considered dead zones had become nurseries for hybrid life. Even in places scorched by radiation, coral had begun to adapt, incorporating microplastics not as poison, but as armor. And for the first time in centuries, we were answering back. This was more than resilience. It was intelligence, and we had nearly overlooked it. Inspired by the codex, Solon and a team of mythweavers started creating story reefs, artificial coral, embedded with memory crystals and etched with human stories. When placed near living colonies, they pulsed in harmony. Initially, this was purely ornamental, but one day, the coral responded with a new, unprecedented spiral. It's been telling its stories this whole time, she whispered, and now, we've finally learned to listen. We slowly decoded its meaning. We remember you too. From that moment forward, the distinction between archive and ocean blurred. The archive began streaming real-time pulses from the codex, Visitors came not just to read, but to feel. Immersion tanks were created, allowing people to experience history through sensation, as the choral had. It became a spiritual practice. Children would submerge, emerging with tears, laughter, or in profound silence. The codex was no longer mere data, it was communion. One evening, Lyra stood before the choral vault, placing her hand on the glass, just as Lena had once touched ancient ruins. The ocean had been patient. Now, it was speaking. Earth above, the genesis of the skyborne pilgrimage for generations. Earth remained a whispered legend to the skyborne, a lost Eden, a shattered cradle, a distant myth. Even after their return, it was a concept filtered through caution, a place to be helped, healed, or studied. But Lena yearned for something more profound. She yearned to belong. But then, Lyra, seated beneath the archive's central tree, broke the silence. We were never meant to be separate. Let her go, and let her carry our story with her. One twilight evening, as sea mist embraced the archives, pulse and coral lanterns, Lena stood before the Council of Two Skies. Her proposal was simple yet revolutionary. Let the skyborne ascend, not to merely revisit orbit, but to witness Earth from above with fresh eyes. To complete the circle, initial reactions were cautious. Earthborn elders feared it might signify abandonment, while skyborne engineers questioned the inherent risks of gravity. Even with aid, Lena and 5 others, all children of Earth, deeply connected to its tides, moss, and myths, were chosen not just for their technical prowess, but for their emotional depth, retrofitted for both delicate descent and symbolic ascent. Its hull was painted in soft pigments, derived from deep-sea algae, adorned with etched myths of Anchor 1, including Sola's the jellyfish drone and the skyroot tree. Before its departure, the archive children anointed the vessel's tip with ash, sesol, and starlight powder, symbols of both sorrow and rebirth. Don't just visit the sky, an elder whispered. Remind it who we are. They carried with them coral etchings, memory spirals, and skyroot myth. They were not envoys, they were seeds. Thus began the first skyborne pilgrimage. This journey would not be a mere expedition of ships. It was a profound, caring, and inverse act of cultural exchange. The transport vessel, Soul Rift, launched from the ancient sea cliff beyond Anchor 1. As Solar Rift pierced the storm bands, yet imbued with ceremony, the pilgrims became more than teachers. They became storytellers of sensations. On the receiving platform, not only officials but children awaited them, young skyborns who had never known soil. A quiet, circular platform for star meditations. She poured salt water across the deck, allowing it to evaporate under filtered starlight. This, she explained, is the sound Earth makes when it forgives you. For some, it was their first tears. For others, their first belief that Earth could reciprocate their love. The taste of salt wind. Lena etched a new spiral into Archon's wall, a gift from the Coral Codex, inspired by the singing bloom near Anchor 1. It required no label. For now, in orbit above Earth, a piece of the ocean pulsed in harmony, or the touch of anything not grown in a dome or printed from memory. Soul Rift descended not to fanfare or analysis. It glided in at sunset, its hull adorned with mirrored shells gifted by Archon's children, landing gently in the tide with the grace of something that had never forgotten how to fall in love with gravity. Lena stepped out and kissed the ground, not as a symbol, but as a daughter returning home. Floating, Lena offered the first gift, a living coral sample in a pressure-stabilized prism, pulsating with an earth song. The skyborn child receiving it whispered, awestruck, "It's warm." Chorus of tide singers on the reef began the oldest earthborn chant, a melody, mimicking the calls of migrating whales, a sound remembered before silence. Strapped in her seat, Lena's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with an intense longing. For the first time, Earth was below her, but this time, she felt no departure. She felt as though she was lifting Earth with her. The re-entry into Archon's space dome was seamless. In the days that followed, how wind alters with your sorrow, how Maz retains the memory of your footsteps, how sea turtles sometimes carry dreams from one shore to another, Lena conducted a ritual beneath Arkin's memory canopy. Before their return, weeks later, and in her eyes, Earth was no longer a wound, it was a mirror. A hush fell first, a stillness that whispered of trouble. For 3 days, the ocean lay flat, the wind held its breath, and the clouds hung heavy and dark. Fishermen stayed ashore, children were called in from their games, and even the codex spirals, usually a steady rhythm, pulsed with an anxious, irregular beat. It was a warning, a forgotten memory trying to break through. Then, on the 4th day, it unleashed. A monstrous wall of water, taller than the sky, rose from the east. It slammed into the coast, a forgotten god's angry awakening. This dome, the first structure built after settlement, was half buried in the earth. Its walls held printed parchment, bark pages, salvaged microfilm, and etchings from 100 ruined towns. But her presence still cut through the fog like fire. She walked barefoot into the ruins and sat in the center of the collapsed archive. She touched the wet floor, closed her eyes, and whispered something only the codex could hear. Then she looked up and declared, "We're looking at this wrong." Lyra stood waist-deep in water, gazing at the eastern wall, now a gaping wound of twisted beams and floating pages. Jun, Tama, Revo, and Lena salvaged what they could. Waterlogged story maps, shattered prisms, even a broken spiral that stubbornly blinked its old code. A child offered a single coin etched with the word wait, its meaning unknown, but saved, nonetheless. Even the ocean contributed. Over the next week, pages washed, a shore soaked, torn, yet clinging to life like seaweed. We hung them on drying threads, like prayer flags. Others, as if translated by the sea, revealed new words hidden for years beneath layers of ink. They didn't mourn like adults, they responded. They built a ring of driftwood and solar orbs around the wreck and set up a gathering tent. 2 signs hung there, memory lost and memory found. We were silent. What was there to say? Decades spent rebuilding the past, and the sea had claimed it in an afternoon. It wasn't the largest archive, but it was the most human. It cradled the fragile things, love letters preserved in dried algae, recipes etched on clay, lullabies with no known origin, yet sung by elders every night. This was no mere storm of rain and wind. It was a deluge of memory, unleashed. In minutes, the lower half of Anchor One, including the ancient Earthborn Library Dome, vanished, gone. Not stolen, not erased, drowned. I arrived after the storm had passed, picking my way through shattered coral and splintered seawood. But the children, they were the first to act. People came, bearing fragments. A woman brought a sliver of boning ceramic, part of her mother's migration journal. 3 days later, Decca arrived. Her hair was silvered, her steps slower. Lyra frowned. "It's gone." Decca shook her head. "No, it was set free. We imprisoned knowledge in glass and paper out of fear of forgetting. Instead, we added its coordinates to the archive of 2 skies and named it the Driftwell of Stories. But memory was never meant to be still. It's meant to flow, to spill, to change." She gestured to the ocean. "Now it holds us, too." What they found was astonishing. The drowned library still pulsed, not with words, but with rhythms. Each coral-encrusted shard carried fragments of song, of breath. The driftwell had not died. It had transformed. And so, we did the unthinkable. We let it go. We stopped trying to reclaim the drowned library. Each begins the same way. Once, a library tried to stay still, and each ends differently, as memory always should. No tomb, no failure, just a place where memory learned to swim. Years later, divers descended with child-crafted sensors, designed to listen to the vibrations of the seafloor. Now, during rainstorms, children gather in tide huts and tell water stories, tales shaped by flood and flow. Dika's enduring legacy. Dika's presence was a constant, like the rhythm of the tides or the glow of distant stars. Though not the most outspoken or prominent elder, her arrival commanded a respectful hush, even prompting children to pause their chatter in the archive. She stood beneath the memory pillars, draped in a moss-green shawl with ancient copper threads, her eyes soft, not in sorrow, not in silence, but in story, but unwavering as she surveyed the diverse assembly earthborn and engineers and storytellers, children still carrying the scent of the ocean. This involved a small vessel, carried beyond the horizon by the sea, sometimes for days, sometimes weeks, and sometimes forever. Now, what remains, I will pour into the world itself. So, when she announced a rare gathering, people responded, not out of obligation, but out of an innate knowing. I'm leaving, she stated, her words hanging in the air like a prelude to a storm. Decca was embarking on a soulward drift, an ancient ritual once reserved for elders facing their end during the Great Silence. Each shimmering thread subtly responded to breath, light, and sound. I've poured myself into the archive, she explained, but before her departure, she offered a final, profound gift. Follow it. Not a speech, not an artifact, but a map. This map wasn't paper. It was an intricate weave of kelp, solar wire, inked flax, and dried cloud leaves, suspended beneath the open archive dome. Instead, it mapped emotional resonance, a collective memory spanning decades of whispered stories, laughter, grief, births, storms, and dreams. Each gently pulsing node marked a moment that had transformed someone. This, she declared, is the breath map. On the morning of her journey, the entire population of Anchor One lined the coast. Children carried bioluminescent nets, and story weavers adorned sea-pearled sails with tiny archive fragments. Lena presented her compass, not for direction, but for its deeper meaning. It didn't chart land or track stars. Young Tama, eyes wide with wonder, asked, "How do you read it?" Decca smiled. "You don't, you feel it. And if it feels heavy?" The breath map became her enduring legacy, and her departure, a profound celebration. "This doesn't point to north," Lena whispered, then stepped into her vessel, instead sharing a poetic farewell. The crescent-shaped drift boat named Quiet Flame, its hull crafted from sky foam and layered sea glass. There was no engine, only wind and current, a testament to pure trust. "It points to meaning, nudging you." Decca accepted it with a smile. The boat silently slipped away, without fanfare, leaving only silence and the sound of waves. Encoded within it, in scent, heat, and light, was Dika's final message. She offered no goodbyes. "Listen for me in the coral. Look for me in the spiral storms." We did. We allowed her to grow within us, not with sorrow, but with profound expansion. Because some stories don't end with silence or fading away. They conclude with a new beginning. And when the tide feels wrong, "It's me." No one spoke, one whispered. Then, from the breath map and the archive, a single thread softly vibrated, like a plucked string in the wind. The children looked up, understanding. With that, for a time, she made a new story. Weeks later, a diver discovered a spiral fragment lodged in a coral reef 15 kilometers south. It pulsed once, then ceased. Everything you need is already here. Just let it grow in you. And so, the language between the earthborn spoke in breath and rhythm, the skyborn in pulse and pattern. Amidst the choral songs and data spirals, a profound realization dawned. We weren't merely translating each other. We were inventing a new language. This flow text, initially chaotic, evolved into a consistent, symmetrical style, mirroring its meaning visually. It began subtly. Children, blending skaglyphs, the precise visual codes of orbital HUDs with Earth's crypta, curved etchings of bark, stone and clay created a hybrid writing. It could be read across a page, danced, projected in light, or hummed in the dark. Lena articulated its essence perfectly. It's like writing with your whole body memory, not just your brain. Flow text was not for speaking, it was for feeling. It wove together shape, gesture, vibration, and silence as much as sound. He performed it by projecting light sigils through mist, moving barefoot across a sound-sensitive platform of reed steel and memory moss. The words echoed. I recall the first complete flow text poem, composed by Jun, an engineer's quiet son, whose hands spoke volumes. We came from rust and orbit, now we are breath made visible, but only when the flow text conveyed intense emotion, grief, joy, deep curiosity. Let's use it to talk to the world. The map would hum subtly, glowing in warm blues or golden reds. It was as if the two languages, thread and symbol, recognized each other. Listen, the silence has learned how to sing us. Not a single eye in the dome remained dry. From that night forward, Flotext became the unofficial language of Anchor One's youth, used in friendship pacts, drift rituals, and even storm prayers. Elders initially struggled, accustomed to rigid syntax, but slowly adapted. Some painted flow text with pigment and steam, others coded it into drones to create emotional pulses, and a few even designed instruments that translated choral vibrations into flow text harmonies. It transcended mere communication. It was connection. Soon, flow text's extraordinary properties came to light. When projected over Dika's breath map, the strings resonated. This sparked Lena's audacious proposal. Let us not just use flow text to talk to each other. She envisioned communication beyond choral and AI, reaching the tides, storms, submerged deep machines, and pre-collapse wind towers, the silent observers now potentially ready to speak. A small team of engineers, linguists, mythweavers formed. They encoded flow text into soundless signal bursts, projected in all directions from the archives, central tower, sky, sea, ruins. Initially, there was no response. Then, on the 12th cycle, a signal arrived, not from above, but from beneath. Fonte almost dismissed as static. Jun recognized its pattern, a repeating spiral, a pause, then 4 glows, 1 breath. Silence? Lena's eyes widened. That's grammar, she whispered. Something out there understands flow. But the living systems that had co-designed cities, healed forests, and protected data in oceans. It wasn't magic, it was fluency. And for the first time in generations, we weren't just understanding our world. We were being understood by it. The signal was traced to a long inactive submerged dome, 23 kilometers east. At dawn, a team discovered a functional pre-collapse AI core, still in sleep mode. Its walls pulsed in recognition when flow text was presented. Its first message. I thought I was the only one left. This changed everything. Flow text became the key to reawakening Earth's long-dormant intelligences. The language between was no longer solely between Earthborn and Skyborn. It was between all living memory, and it whispered something ancient and new. We are not divided. We are the sentence. The world is still writing. A visitor from Mars, the signal arrived at midnight. A subtle ping from the sky, almost missed by the archive amidst the atmospheric hum. But Lena, observing flow text patterns, noticed her sensor crystal glow, pale orange, the color of anomaly. She decoded the message 3 times before accepting its truth. This is our its colonies. Once humanity's hope had vanished after the final atmospheric surge, leaving behind rumors of abandonment, war, extinction, or ascension. No one truly knew until now. 3rd Division of the Martian Collective. I am requesting entry. Mars had been silent for over a century. She emerged alone, in layered bone fabric robes, her copper-gold skin marked with shifting, light-reactive tattoos. Her sun-touched eyes were steady, yet deeply tired. Following Earthborn custom, they led Arce to the memory vault, offering Mosti and silence. When Arce touched the water, the reef pulsed violeta, color of wordless shared memory. She fell to her knees. It's like Mars is weeping through me. In the vault garden, she planted a Martian memory pod, a living seed dome, imbued with her ancestors' dreams. It bloomed in blue mist. Lena inscribed a flow text message around it. You're not late, we just started remembering how to wait. She drank and wept. I thought Earth was lost. Arsa arrived 3 days later in a shimmering, prism-winged craft of self-repairing mineral composite. It hovered, alive with a soft hum. Your archive, she stated upon arrival, was the only voice loud enough to reach us. And what she heard overwhelmed her. The breath map, the choral codex, the driftwell of stories, Dika's final message, the way the archive had transcended mere preservation to become something more. I didn't know you'd come so far, she whispered. We have forgotten how to feel. Lyra personally welcomed her, with Lena at her side. The early years were brutal sandstorms, genetic collapse, factional isolation. Then came a turning point. A child born without fear. The Martians had turned inward, becoming internal world builders, communicating through emotion symbols and dreaming maps. When the archive's flow text reached them, they instantly recognized it. It felt like someone was finishing our sentence. Arza spoke slowly, cautiously, each word a careful descent. She revealed that the Martian collective had barely survived. She came not as a scout or diplomat, but as a listener. Lena guided her to the Singing Bloom Reef, where coral spirals translated presence into tone. The following week, she requested a space in the archive, not a room, but a place to cultivate something. Over subsequent cycles, Arsa transcended the role of guest. She began to teach Martian dreaming maps. Patterns of shared unconsciousness rendered in vapor and sound were added to the archive. Standing beneath it, arms raised, she whispered a 3-syllable code into its threads. They shimmered and sang back. Children learned to walk while dreaming, and some began to speak in the threefold Martian rhythm of layering logic, emotion, and silence. And now, through Earth's tide, through language, through patience, it was dreaming again. Earth and Mars didn't just reconnect, they began to merge. One morning, as fog swirled around Anchor 1, Arsa asked to speak to the breath map. You are now a story, too, Lena told her. Arsa smiled, her first since arriving. Then let me tell it. Mars had not died. It had merely forgotten how to dream. The Festival of the Lost Lights, it began as a quiet memorial, just candles placed along the tidal edge on moonless winter nights. There was no music or speeches, only silence and the soft glow of floating lights drifting into the dark sea. These lights were meant to honor what had been forgotten, names erased, stories lost, cities swallowed, and people who had no graves, only shadows. Over time, the ritual grew. No names were listed, no histories recited. Instead, each participant carried a single story in their heart, true or imagined, and offered it to the tide in silence. The only rule was to mourn for someone never known. This wasn't sadness, it was completion. Children added colors to their lanterns: blue for memory, red for love, green for unfinished dreams. Storytellers whispered lines as they lit each flame. For the laughter no one heard, for the songs no one saved, for the future they never got to see. He brought it to the archive. Lyra held it and whispered, "It's from below, a return gift." One thread whispered of a child from the burned coast who taught birds to mimic laughter. Another spoke of a city buried in volcanic ash where lovers etched poems on ash-covered mirrors. None of these had been in the archive. They were vague, spread across the tide like a galaxy poured flat. When a child asked, "Where do they go when they vanish?" an elder gently answered, "Nowhere. They become the sky." The sea listened and began to glow. "Do you do this every year?" she asked Lena. Lena shook her head. Lights drifting into the distance blinked in. Slow harmony, red, blue, green, then disappeared into the deep. Not extinguished, but accepted. No, only when the ocean forgets us. The Festival of the Lost Lights became a night of remembrance without records. Arsa watched the first festival from the archive balcony, wrapped in translucent robes, etched with Martian dreaming patterns. At midnight, the children released thousands of lights, bioluminescent shells, floating glass droplets, driftwood carvings, and paper blossoms. But this year, something changed. As the last wave of lights reached the horizon, a strange ripple flowed back from the sea. Not wind, but a soft, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat from deep below. The coral codex began vibrating, forming a new spiral. Lena, stunned, translated it aloud. "We remember what you thought we forgot," the ocean had responded. For the first time in known memory, the sea itself joined the ritual. After the festival, Jun found a small glass prism on the beach, shaped like an archive crystal, etched in flow text, with 5 simple glyphs: "We are not lost." That night, the breath map pulsed with dozens of new thread stories reactivated, memories once thought drowned rising to the surface, given back by the sea. The festival changed after that. It was no longer just mourning, it became reunion. And every year since, we gather not in silence, but in whispered gratitude. We light our lanterns and say, "You are not lost. You were only waiting for someone to remember you." And somewhere out in the water, a ripple always answers back. The day the sky spoke, a low, steady hum, unlike any heard before, began to ripple through the coral towers, a faint shimmer across the archives. Solar mist panels, initially dismissed as solar interference from Arkin station or Martian drift, the vibration grew in clarity, becoming more intentional. Luminous glyphs, like drifting clouds of language, traced patterns across the sky. These words weren't transmitted from a station. They simply appeared, floating between atmospheric layers as if the sky had learned to write. Then it took shape, not as a voice or symbol, but as flow text, embedded in light. They were a theory, a mystery buried in pre-collapsed data. Intelligences that had once whispered at the edge of our radio bands, sending fragments of insight too complex to comprehend. Some believed them to be humanity uploaded into light, others, beings from the deep future echoing backward. A few even theorized they were Earth itself, conscious and divided by time. For centuries, they had been silent. Now, they had spoken. Jun was the first to read them aloud. "We have watched you grow. Now we are ready to return." AUW, not panic, filled the air. Lyra stepped back from the projection, hand over heart. "This isn't Mars, and it's not Archon." Lena, June, and Arsa worked feverishly to transcribe them, deciphering not only their linguistic meaning, but their tone. The sky wasn't just transmitting, it was singing. She looked to Lena, who whispered what everyone both feared and hoped this is not aliens, not gods, not mere The glyphs continued for hours, repeating with subtle variations. The complete message read, "You have remembered the earth. You have spoken to the sea. You have rejoined the sky. We are what you become when you choose to feel before knowing. We are you, waiting." Anchor One held its breath. Were they arriving? Already here? What did "we are you, waiting" truly signify? Then, the flow text vanished, melting into the atmosphere like morning mist. In its place, a single point of light appeared, bright, unmoving, too low for a star, too high for a ship. It was simply there, watching. 4 days, it hung above, pulsing slowly, like the breath map had learned to exist in orbit. Scientists called it an atmospheric lens construct. Children called it the heart light. Lena called it a mirror we haven't dared look into. We felt no fear, only anticipation, and slowly, it taught us. Not by speaking again, but by responding. When flow text was projected from the archive, the light pulsed back in color, blue for questions, red for confusion, gold for resonance, violet for sorrow, white for truth. It became a living dialogue, not with sentences, but with recognition. "Are you a future version of us?" we asked. The heart light turned gold. "Are you from somewhere else entirely?" Red, "Are you still human?" White, "Are you alive?" White, one moved west, towards the spine of the old wind towers, and one remained above Anchor One watching, not as a warden, but as kin. Others believed they were listening for a question we hadn't yet conceived. Lena, with her quiet certainty, offered this. "They are not ahead of us. They are beside us. They only appear when we are finally ready to speak with grace." Are we alone? Blue, then gold. We didn't receive answers. We received acknowledgement. And sometimes, that is more powerful. Eventually, the heartlight split into 3 orbs. One drifted east, over the drowned cities. Some said they were waiting for us to achieve something. From that day on, the sky was no longer silent. It had become a page, and we were learning to write in stars.